Okay, we're ready,
We're on deck, okay.
kind of.
Call the meeting to order at 7:10 PM. And we did complete a roll call first.
Sean Cobb.
Roger Fromm,
Catherine Nyberger.
Sam Solars.
Steve Gritman.
Jessica Bonniwell.
okay. Ask everyone to stand for the pledge of allegiance. Okay. Don't want you falling.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda for the evening? Do we have approval? Anyone
I'll approve it. We make a motion to approve it. I'll
The
second.
motion to approve, she made a motion to approve, you have a
I'll
second?
second it.
So we have a second. And the good news is Jessica is on top of it. She has this all written down. Okay, approval for the previous meeting minutes from September the 11th meeting.
I'll approve the meeting from September meeting.
From September 11th meeting,
I'll second.
okay? There we go.
We'll get it all done. I'll
All
tell you
right.
that. I better look
Now we
at
need,
it. I'll be fine.
okay.
I was
Well, we're gonna keep you busy here, because we need a motion to close the planning and zoning meeting and open the public hearing.
Now,
That's
let's,
our agenda.
we will close our meeting, public meeting, and
Ignoring our clock.
then we'll go with the,
Okay,
what do you call it?
so you're moving to close the planning and zoning meeting
Yeah.
and open for public
Here,
hearing. Okay? Do I hear a
Second.
second? Here's a second. Okay, so meeting's closed, we're gonna open up for public hearing. We have 4 in the audience, thank you for coming. And do we have anyone who'd like to step forward?
So,
I'm sorry.
We'll probably have Steve.
Do you want to go first, Steve?
sure, yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Introduce the item for you and try and walk through this a little bit. Some of this I know is not new. We've had some previous discussion about it as we prepared to move forward. As Plan Commission knows, and maybe members of the audience as well, that the state adopted a new statute and legalizing aspects of cannabis use and cannabis business activity in Minnesota. Cannabis use allowances took effect over the summer, and we are scheduled to have allowance for businesses beginning in January of 2025. The state initiated a new state office called the Office of Cannabis Management. That office will be the official licensor of cannabis businesses. It'll be the state responsibility, and they will interact with the local governments to ensure that cannabis businesses that are proposed to be licensed in the various communities are in their proper locations. So the cities retain zoning authority, basically, and there are a handful of areas that the city specifically has statutory authority to regulate in, and we'll go through those in a little bit here. I'll give you a little more background that there's some of the material in the ordinance draft that you have in front of you that is purely administrative. It's not planning and zoning. So the city is considering interacting and entering into a joint powers agreement with the county to do the administrative side of this. So if the council chooses to do that, then it will be the council that, or the county that handles the local registration side. And there's a little bit of a backstory to that as well, and we'll cover that as we go through a few of these items. But generally the way this works is the state will consider a license application. They will contact local government, in our case, the county, if we adopt the joint powers, or the city if we do not, and ask if that location that the applicant is proposing to occupy is properly zoned for the type of business they want to have. We will report back, we or the county, and if they are properly located in an appropriate zoning district and their building meets building code and just some other local government regulations, then the state will then pick it back up and do all the licensing, background checks, and everything for that applicant. At that point, then once somebody is have a business location, they will begin their business activities. There are some compliance requirements that are part of the law that the local government is responsible for. If it is a retailer who is selling product, there are compliance checks that are required to be made, just kind of like tobacco or alcohol, where the sheriff or some designated authority will go and make sure they're not selling to minors and those kinds of rules. But that would be, if we end up in the joint powers agreement, then that would be a county function. Otherwise, it would become a local government function. Again, reporting back to the state with the results of that. If there are violations, the city has the ability to intervene on the license application. It's possible that licenses can be revoked if there are sufficient grounds. And it's also possible that licenses may not be renewed for a business that continues to violate the terms of the agreement or the statute. So that's kind of an overview of how this would work. There are many different types of businesses under the state's licensing scheme. There are 5 different kinds of retail licenses, and there are 9 different kinds of industrial or production kind of licenses that exist. Of the retail, basically they're just a kind of a straight retail store. If they want to sell cannabis products, and I should pause here to specify that the state is distinguished between cannabis and what we've known as THC infused or hemp products. So that still is a distinction. The state, though, is going to take over all licensing for both products. So in the past, it's been a local government function. The city's been cooperating with the county for enforcement and those kinds of things on hemp, which kind of came in a year before cannabis did. There will still be those 2 kinds of products, but the state will be doing all the licensing for those. So a hemp retailer, a hemp-infused product that maybe gummies you might have heard of, or other edibles, sometimes hemp-infused beverages. Those are now called low-potency hemp edible products. That is a separate licensed retail category, and we expect that the county will continue to regulate those just as they have, probably similar to those locations that have tobacco licenses, similar to that. Otherwise, a cannabis retailer who is selling higher potency cannabis products would have a separate kind of retail license. There is a medical dispensary currently under the law. If they want to retail goods to the general public in addition to the medical side, they would have a special kind of retail license. And then there are 2 combination business types of licenses for businesses that might do some of their own growing or own production and then want to sell retail of the products that they produce. So there's 2 different kinds of those. They're separated just by size. That's the only difference between micro and meso businesses, if you see that language. So those are the 5 retail licenses. Retail licenses, we have the authority to impose actually on all kinds of licenses, we have the ability to impose a buffer zone. between cannabis businesses and certain types of land uses in the city. And the state lays that out as maximum buffers from schools, 1,000 feet, or from parks or residential treatment centers or daycares at 500 feet. Those are the state maximum buffers. They also say that we can establish those buffers, but we can't create buffers that are so big that it wipes out all of our eligible land use areas. So, and one of the things that becomes relevant for Montrose because the school is very close to not only our industrial park where there would be production facilities potentially, but also a large strip of the retail areas along Highway 12. The school is within 1,000 feet of most of those areas. So what we had to do as we worked through this was figure out how much buffer we could require without prohibiting, having the effect of prohibiting those types of uses. And I'll talk a little bit about our recommendation here. I'll interject here too. There's a little bit of a complication with the county now. We've found out more recently. The county has its own ordinance, and if we are in a joint powers agreement with the county, there is some conflict right now as to whether the county's rules will apply or the city's rules will apply on the zoning and buffer side of it. I think right now the county's assumption, at least the way it's written, is that their rules would apply. We think there's maybe some movement on that. We'll have to see how this all shakes out with the county. As with most of these cannabis things change all the time. We're going to adopt some ordinances eventually before the end of the year, and I will promise you that we will be revisiting this in the not too distant future as changes from the state level or from the county level or from our own initiative change how we think about the businesses that are in place. So that's a little bit about the structure. We have the state telling us they're going to license. We have a local government responsibility to deal with zoning, and then there's a county level cooperative option that may occur. The city council will be dealing with that aspect of things in the coming few weeks. I mentioned there are 9 types of industrial licenses, and I'm not going to be able to tick them all off, but they're basically growers, processors of different types, transportation facilities, other types of production, packaging, anything that goes into a kind of industrial process. There's pretty much a separate kind of license for any business that's dealing with cannabis products at the industrial level, with the presumption that they are doing that to wholesale those goods to another retail outlet. And then there's that combination meso or micro business that could be allowed to do both. The way we've structured this ordinance is to actually not allow the mixing of uses, to not permit retailing in our industrial area, and also then not permit processing or production type of industrial use in our retail. So those exist under state law, but our recommendation here is to stay straight with our zoning. Retail in one area, industrial in others. I want to talk a little bit about the buffering. And if we were to adopt the state maximum, as I mentioned, primarily because of the school, the vast majority of our commercial industrial land would become ineligible based on the 1,000-foot proximity to the school area. And in fact, even if we shrink that buffer down, if we measure from the boundary lines of the school, we still roll in a lot of properties that might otherwise be eligible sites. So our recommendation here on the buffering from the school is to use a 400-foot distance measured by the path that somebody would take from front entrance to front entrance. And in fact, the language that I proposed to you, we continue to refine a little bit. I think I used the kind of along a public street language. There are potential areas where we might want to think about public sidewalk, pedestrian access too. So we're continuing to refine that language to make sure that that 400-foot travel distance is going to be effective and clear in the ordinance. And by doing that, then we do allow the retail areas along Highway 12 and the industrial areas along on the east side of the city to become eligible cannabis business enterprises. Probably one thing I skipped over is that the statute allows the city to limit the number of retail licenses that you are required to have. Everybody is required, every local government is required to have at least one. Counties at large are required to have at least one per every 12,500 population. That goes for cities too. Obviously for Montrose, that means just one retail license you're required to have. You can write your ordinance to allow more if you choose to. And the county interactions here are that it sounds like it's their intent that once we hit 15 for the county overall, that of those communities in the joint powers agreement, then they will cut off licensing at 15. And I will also mention that the cities with their own police forces generally are not going to be part of the joint powers. So Buffalo, Annandale, Howard Lake, I think, that might be all of them. They will be doing their own license or own registration outside of the county's jurisdiction. So the county has said basically once we hit 15, if they're all in Otsego, then so be it. They're going to quit. They're going to quit issuing licenses. So we'll just have to see how that shakes out. The county has to develop a process for processing multiple registrations. If they get them, they'll have to decide how to prioritize. And different communities are doing it differently. Some of them are first come first serve. Some of them are other types of lottery type of options that the county will have to sort through that as part of their activity. I also note in the report here that the distance buffer that we can impose for residential treatment centers or for daycare basically are of no difference to us, because the maximum state buffer for these locations really don't affect any of our areas that the school already wouldn't take out if that were imposed. So I've just recommended that we use primarily, in most of those situations, the maximum buffer. It's the school buffer that is the one that is most complicated here. Oh, I'm sorry, I back up, I misspoke in one way. We did recommend 300 feet from a park. The statute says 500 feet. For my public park that has facilities that are an attraction to minors. And our recommendation here is that we use 300 feet. There are a few parks that would have some impact on Highway 12 businesses, particularly I think it's Lions Park that adjoins this property, and the park that is just south of Jacoby's. But if we use 300 feet, we kind of introduce the opportunity for those Highway 12 businesses without running into an issue of creating some problems. So our recommendation is 300 feet on parks. And also to say that all parts of any park are areas that may attract youth, so that we don't have to worry about whether or not this park has a playground or a ball field or whatever. Any park is going to be part of this. So we're measuring from the boundary on parks, not just the elements of the facility. I'll also add here another aspect of the county's ordinance is that right now they are including churches and residential areas and one other libraries in their buffer zone. That language is not in the state law, and I'm not aware of any local government attorneys who think that that is allowable for them to pursue. We are not recommending that we make any additions beyond what the state allows us specifically to do. By doing that, we think you're at risk of overstepping what the statute is intended to allow. So we'll have to reconcile that with the county as we go forward, and there are still some aspects of that to work through. Whether the county's ordinance, first of all, will be, whether their position will be that we have to use their ordinance, and then secondarily, how it impacts our community. Handful of other zoning things that you can impose. You can impose hours of operation. You can write language around odor. Then we'll talk about temporary cannabis events separately, but I did want to just talk about hours of operation. The statute has hours of operation in it. It says any cannabis business has to be closed between the hours of 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. Monday through Saturday, and 2 a.m. and 10 a.m. on Sundays. And that is consistent with the state's alcohol regulations. There are cities, and the statute does allow you to shrink those hours of operation if you choose to some extent. There's a little bit of a limitation as to how far down you can shrink it, but that's something we can discuss if you're interested in it. That is sort of a zoning land use related thing. It's a little more administrative than land use, but if you've got thoughts about it, we can certainly have that conversation. Odor is another item. The statute talks about odor, and the OCM's model ordinance talks about odor. The problem with odor is that nobody has an objective way of measuring whether odor is technically a nuisance or not. It's we'll all have different opinions about that. There is nuisance law that applies to odor generally anyway, and so our recommendation to you is just to rely on nuisance law at this point rather than try and write a long ordinance around odor, which is inevitably going to be untested because we won't have an objective way of measuring that for you. At some point, we know of some communities as well as the Pollution Control Agency that are trying to work on regulations around odor so that there's more of an objective standard. And if those come to us with good ideas, we'll certainly offer those to the city. But at this point, I think we're probably better off just kind of leaving that in the nuisance law category. So, kind of the last one to talk about is cannabis events, and this is one that is giving every community a little trouble. The statute requires that you are required to authorize cannabis events in your community of up to 4 days in length. And what a cannabis event is not defined in the statute or in the Office of Cannabis Management rules. You might imagine that a cannabis event might be kind of a farmer's market kind of an idea. It could be something like that. Could be like a local winery doing a wine tasting. We don't really know. So it could be all of those or any of those. In any case, we're required to allow them. If they are occurring, the questions for the local government are where should you allow them? Because that is a zoning question, so you have some zoning authority there. And what kinds of rules would you apply to them if you are inclined to do that? The rules that usually get discussed most often are you going to allow retail sales at that event?
Like
And-
Winstock,
Pardon?
like Winstock.
Yeah, I haven't been to Woodstock, so.
No, Winstock and
I'm sorry. Yes, I was thinking of the the music festival out in Woodstead, sorry. Uh, um, Yeah, so are you gonna allow retail sales at an event? And then secondarily, are you gonna allow consumption at an event? So if this were a wine tasting somewhere, people are gonna say, well, obviously you're gonna allow tasting. I mean, that's the point of the event. Retail sales are very commonly a part of cannabis events, we think, and we expect them to be. There could be a display idea, but in most cases, we would expect that there are going to be intent to sell in retail the goods that the various vendors have to display. So the recommendation in this ordinance is that any cannabis event that you authorize has to be in a zoning district where you would authorize a brick and mortar store. So it has to meet the same buffers from your schools and from your parks and et cetera. Those types of, has to be zoned in a commercial way. That way a cannabis event can't sidestep your zoning rules by opening up in the school parking lot or something like that. So the way this is written is to apply the same zoning and buffer rules to an event as you would to a brick and mortar store, with the same distances and everything. Many communities, and the way we've proposed this, are prohibiting smoking at these events. Smoking in a lot of communities has been expanded to include smoking of any product, because law enforcement is going to have to be responsible for deciding if somebody is smoking at an event, whether they're violating the law or not. So the general rule that most communities have applied here is that we're just not going to allow smoking at an event. You can't smoke anything. And that would include vaping or whatever it may be. But most communities have then said, we don't really have a way of prohibiting somebody from eating a gummy or drinking a beverage, just as we would with any other event where there might be an alcohol permit. So the way this is structured is to say no smoking, but ingestibles such as gummies or other edible or drinkable products may be consumed at an event, just like we might if a local charity was putting on an event where you might have a beer tent or something like that. So similar treatment. The difficulty with cannabis generally is that there are some aspects of it that are kind of public health and nuisance oriented, the smoking, that aspect of it, and there are some aspects that are definitely just nuisance side, and so it doesn't fit conveniently in a category of tobacco or a category of alcohol. So it has to kind of, we're having to find its own way here as we work through this. So if it did more easily in one of those, this would be a lot easier. So, but it's not. So the proposal here is that again, prohibit smoking at events, but not write a prohibition around other edible or ingestible products that are otherwise legal according to the law. When we look at smoking, this is really more of a city council decision as to whether they're going to create any smoking bans. Obviously, those usually end up on public property like public parks or on the community center property, that kind of thing. Almost never have communities tried to enforce smoking bans on the public sidewalks or that kind of thing. At some point, they've drawn the line at that level. There's some irony around that from alcohol, because the state law says you can't drink open bottle on the sidewalk, but what can we say? Like I said, it doesn't fit neatly in either category. So I think that's a very long, and I apologize for the length, very long summary of what I've presented to you tonight. Some of this is zoning, and that is really subject to your purview. I've given all of it to you though, so you have the context of how this fits together. Your duty here tonight is to consider those zoning aspects. If you have other recommendations on the entire ordinance, I think you're welcome to make those. The city council will then take up your recommendation, particularly on the zoning aspects, in their consideration of, first of all, the joint powers, and then the adoption of their own ordinance. I also will say, before I close, I had some conversations with the city attorney's office recently, and they expect that when we wrote the administrative side of this, we didn't know, and we still, I suppose, technically don't know whether the city will enter the joint powers agreement. So we tried to write it so whichever way the council goes on that aspect, we'll have an ordinance that we can enforce. It defers to the county if the county takes that authority under the JPA, but then it also leaves in place the city's authority if the city does not enter that agreement. So that said, the attorney's office thinks there's going to be a way to shrink some of that down as we get to the final ordinance draft. But everything in front of you is open for conversation tonight. And, I indicated to the attorney that I would report back to him tomorrow with the results of your conversations tonight. And with that, I will finally close and be happy to answer any questions if you've got some.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. Questions for Steve?
I have a question. How does the local tobacco license interact with cannabis? I mean, we have several businesses that sell tobacco. Now, is cannabis in the tobacco category?
No, it is not. There are, if you want to count tobacco, there's 3 categories of license. Tobacco would be one. Cannabis, full-on marijuana cannabis would be a second. And then low-potency hemp is the third. And low-potency hemp products, including the edibles and the beverages, are the ones that most easily match with the tobacco licensing. So you may find some stores that, the convenience stores that are selling tobacco, cigarettes, whatever, but also have a license to sell gummies or maybe beverages perhaps. Or the liquor store very well may be selling infused beverages. But that does not include cannabis products, the higher potency material.
Because
What
Dollar
would be the
Tree
benefit to the
is-
city of seceding power, so to speak, to the county on this? Or getting into that agreement? What's our benefit in that?
Well, the primary benefit is that the county takes over all of the regulatory side of it. There's a small registration fee that local governments are able to take from the business applicant. The county would take that fee, but they would also then be responsible for processing the license or the registration at the local level. And then the county has said that as part of the joint powers that they will then cover compliance under their sheriff's contract. But that if you don't enter the joint powers, it's my understanding the county's position is that they will not cover compliance checks as part of their sheriff's contract, and then it will be left to the city to do that, or try and find another way around that aspect. So there's a pretty big gap if you don't get into it.
Right.
Well, my question was for the distances you mentioned, the 300 feet and the 400 feet. How does that comply or come close to what the county is thinking?
The county's ordinance right now imposes the maximum state allowance. So when we say 400 feet from the school measured from entrance door to entrance door, the county is saying 1,000 feet measured from the edge of the property.
Right.
So,
their statute in Montrose, if they apply that would be illegal. They can't do that.
That's
So they have to figure that out.
yeah. That would be my position also.
Yeah.
So I don't think they would be able to do that under the law. There will be further discussions with the county and the county attorney's office to make sure we avoid those crashes.
Right.
Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Before we let Steve go? Okay, all right. I'll make the one observation, that whatever we end up with is something we're not, as long as we are sharing and use the sheriff's department as law enforcement, we don't want to burden them with exceptional rules or things that place a burden on a deputy. They have to remember that we're different than the rest of the county. That to me would be a very difficult enforcement situation. So we need a degree of consistency in there somewhere. Okay. So I have some homework I've done, but I'll share that after we open it. We have our friends here very patient for us. I'd like to go ahead and ask for, now if I'm not misbehaving, a motion to close the planning and zoning
Make
meeting.
a motion to close.
No.
Nope.
You gotta ask for a public comment 3 times.
You can invite the public to participate.
You have to ask if there's any public comment 3 times.
3 times.
Okay, so I need to ask them
During the hearing.
Yeah.
during the hearing.
Yep.
Okay.
If there's any
Before
public.
we can close it,
Yep,
I'd
before we
like to
close.
do that.
Sorry. I
Okay,
put that
so
in there.
I ask for public comment on what we've discussed so far and on this topic.
Well, if we put something like this in Montrose, how long is the state gonna come out and inspect it every month to see if they're running it right? Or if somebody's doing something illegal?
The question was about the state's role if a business does open up in Montrose. Their role will be licensing only, and then it will be either the county or the city's responsibility for making sure they're still meeting their requirements until it's up on time for them to relicense. And then the state will be back in the picture at that point to
Is
consider.
Delmo putting one of these in too?
Every city is required to
Now,
allow.
are they gonna be buying from a regular dealer, or are they gonna be buying from back and forth on the market somewhere?
The question is where a business might be buying their product from? Is that what you're asking? They would have to buy from a licensed
From a
manufacturer.
From a regular rep like Minneapolis has got right now. They
Yeah,
have to be buying it from.
that they would have to buy from a licensed manufacturer, right? Grower or manufacturer.
There's that one bunch that got caught down in the cities for illegal.
There's plenty of bad actors. There's
They
no doubt
lost
about
their
that.
license, yeah.
Yeah.
I just don't want Montrose to get hurt.
What?
Understood.
We don't want Montrose, people in Montrose to get hurt.
Oh,
So, okay, any other further comments from the audience? No? Any further comments, questions from the audience? Okay, so can I go this now? All right. So I'm asking for a motion to close this meeting.
I make a
open for
motion
public
to close
hearing.
the planning and zoning meeting, no, the public hearing meeting, and reopen the planning and zoning meeting.
We wanted to open up for public hearing at this time, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll second.
Second? All right. So we're now open for comments from the floor.
We just closed that.
I understand.
We
So,
closed.
yeah,
Now
okay.
we're back into the.
Yeah, now it's
Well,
just
we've
you guys.
now come down and close the public hearing to open the planning and zoning.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, that's another step.
That's another step. That's why,
I
that's
think you-
why.
Yep,
I was
we already did it.
going-
I I think you just did that,
Yeah.
actually.
You already
Like
did.
that.
I think we're now, okay, all right.
Yeah,
That
I
we're
think
good.
you're good.
So if you're, I know we're gonna run along, but I'd like to share a little bit of homework that I've done, which may be useful to at least capture for our city council. You know, because we're gonna be primarily focused from a zoning standpoint for distances more than anything else. And the remainder is an issue for the council to handle. I had a couple of data points that I found. One is that the politics of the state is enormous. We have a moving target, but for example, the Office of Cannabis Management announced that the people who are being given a priority of applications for becoming cannabis management or dealers licenses are individuals who are formerly convicted of cannabis-related offenses. So there's preferential treatment that if you've been convicted for violating the law with cannabis dealing, you get preferential treatment as far as, and this enters into an interesting set of issues. What my homework entailed is a little bit of research outside of Minnesota and looking at how cannabis adoption and laws have been moved forward. And there's two states that are the leaders in America, and they happen to be New Jersey and Colorado. And both of which, there teases out to be a pattern, and that is, if you look at cannabis 0.3 or below dosage, called medical, typically medical uses, is processed more through the liver. Cannabis for recreational purposes, higher dosage, is typically processed through the lungs. And so that's where the smoking of leaves and that kind of thing versus medical use of marijuana. The second piece of that is the most important point from a medical use of cannabis is the concern of fentanyl poisoning. And that is kicking in a lot in the licensing, the state licensing. Minnesota's behind the eight ball on this. They really are not quite figuring out the separation between recreational use and medical use. Now, the medical use is, it appears, it's Roger's opinion, but it appears as though there's a tremendous vested interest by the pharmaceutical industry to slow down the adoption of medical use of cannabis. Why? Because it's proving to be exceptionally effective versus the use of medicine sold by pharmaceutical companies. And so, for example, my son in New Jersey 4 years ago had a medical instance where he was on 4 medications. And, well, one to solve the problem, the 3 contraindication chain. And it was ending up with a lot of medical side effects for him. His doctor, with the laws changing in New Jersey for medical dispensary, magic language now, medical cannabis dispensary, he goes in with a doctor's prescription and he is able to buy for medical use cannabis designed for, below the 0.3, designed for medical use. And it solved an awful lot of problems for him. So I find that curious. And with a little more homework, it's really getting convoluted, particularly here in Minnesota. And this was just one symptom of it, right? that I think that if, you know, the advice to our council is that to look at this through the lens that, is this a recreational, is this a medicinal dispensary? And the two are very different. Now, both in New Jersey and in Colorado, there is considerable tax revenue generated through the sale of cannabis, in particular medical cannabis, to the degree of 30%. I mean, big taxes. Now, what New Jersey did is they earmarked this enormous tax revenue, earmarked it for law enforcement. So law enforcement was able to buy bullet vests and all that kind of stuff. So the way that the taxes are flowing in the state, again, might be useful for us to pay attention to. There's a lot of money involved in this industry, and when we, you know, some of the decisions that we make from a city council standpoint may affect our share of the tax revenue, which could be meaning, you know, when you take a look at the revenue of companies today selling, let me see, here it is. There's a website, and there's like 15 medical dispensaries in the state of Minnesota, and they're all available on the web. And this is the Q2 revenue benefits of one of them, and it's like $1 million. I mean, you know, we're not, it's non-trivial. And when you start talking about tax revenue of this kind of thing as one example of all of these companies, you end up with, you know, we may want to take a look at this.
We have very little control over any of this because it's at the state level. We're really only in control of the zoning.
Right, the zoning, I was making this for the city council. That is
But even the
why,
city council won't have control over any of that.
well, what I'm finding is that it may currently be that way politically in Minnesota, and Minnesota's making these decisions where only former criminals can have preferred treatment. But in other states, they are moving forward in particular with the medical dispensary model. And that's beginning to be adopted business-wise. And there's all kinds of stuff that brings along. And I think that it's something we need to keep track of where it's going. The trajectory of medical dispensary is something that we need to keep track of.
I
Anyway.
think, don't the doctors keep track of that, who's got it? I think so.
The biggest concern that both the state of New Jersey and the state of Colorado were trying to ensure is that medical patients were not potentially going to be exposed to fentanyl. That's the driving force that they discovered, in particular in Colorado. And so how it's going to turn out, I don't know. But it was eye-opening for me that there's an awful lot of other stuff that's going on. Also thought I would share for, again, more for the council that may view this tape, is that in the religious community, that the Bible refers to cannabis as a component to be used in holy oil. And I was unaware of that. Some states are now looking at this and going, if you have holy anointing oil that's being produced in a church, that we want to be careful from a zoning standpoint, and there may be points that even the state law may be up for legal contention, because we may have portions of the religious community coming back and saying, but the Bible calls for hemp oil being used as a part of holy oil. So again, if you think it was really difficult to begin with a little bit of homework, you can make this a whole lot more difficult. And again, a lot of confusion going on vocabulary-wise between the difference between hemp CBD and marijuana CBD or cannabis CBD. And there's an awful lot of legal distinction going on between is its origin, it's being done from a political standpoint. There is no difference between hemp and cannabis, but from a political standpoint, they're trying to draw the line between that. And again, the distinction between recreational use and medical use. And so, from a zoning standpoint, I feel comfortable with what we're doing so far. But I think the city and the county and the state they're confronted with moving targets that things could be changing here.
Well, I have, in a lot of my research, a lot of this information that you have presented this evening has been discussed at the state level in previous meetings.
I understand. This is not, but, for example, the religious separation, meaning if we zone and say you can't be so many feet from a church, etc., or the production or the use, it becomes a very, very, I think some states have moved too quickly. Some states, it's an evolving set of issues. That's all.
Yes, it is.
All right?
It's fluid.
Yeah, and so also some states like New Jersey, the issue of vocabulary was the hemp versus marijuana, and the differentiation being, is it an agricultural issue? And there's whole acts addressing that from an agricultural standpoint. Again, I'm doing this for the benefit of the city. From a zoning standpoint, I'm comfortable with what we have. Okay? So I will step down from my stool. All right. I believe we have closed the public hearing because we've completed our motion. And there's no old business and no new business? Okay, I'm sorry.
We need to do a recommendation for the city
Yes.
council on the proposed ordinance.
Okay, fine, yeah. So we need a motion to adopt as written or any modifications
And
or
that's
changes?
the question.
Yeah. So,
Does anybody have any
So
proposed
the
changes?
one that you're writing does have a limit on the amount for the city or does not?
Does have a limit on which?
On how many businesses there could be?
That's written into the state.
That's still,
Yeah, the city's adoption will have to have at least one.
well, at least one, but I'm saying, is what we're proposing a limit of 2 or 3 or not, have no limit?
That's technically not a zoning issue, but the language
That's not
that
a
is put
zoning.
together here suggests that you would only have one retailer.
Okay.
yeah, the fee.
Yeah. But I mean, if we enter into the agreement with the county, they're gonna have to figure that out. So,
Right.
as far as the cities, I mean, I would motion to, pass along, the amendment.
To adopt.
To adopt the.
What Steve is
Yeah,
contributing here?
adopt the, what's the correct wording?
To recommend adoption of this ordinance.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll recommend to adopt the ordinance as written by the city commissioner.
As written by Steve. And we have a second.
I will second the motion, but it still can change.
it almost
Yes.
certainly will
It-
change.
Yeah, it's a fluid situation,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. But do we have consensus amongst us, vote
Yes, that we will.
to move forward, to adopt this, to pass it forward to the city, the council as written? Okay? Do I hear?
Take a vote?
Aye, yes, take a vote.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
okay. He carries unanimously.
Did you vote?
Yes, I said aye. Yes. So, any other items that,
Just, there's technically no old business, since this was what we just talked about
This is it.
last time. But just a little bit of an update that the city is currently in a kind of a standstill on new development because of the capacity at the wastewater treatment facility. And so there's work being done to remedy that situation, but the remedy is probably 2, if not 3 years away. So it takes a long time to get to the point of authorizing plans, drawing the plans, getting the plan constructed, or the connections constructed. But there is development interest out there, and developers are a lot of times thinking 2 or 3 years down the road. So there may be some occasional development requests coming forward. All of those are being told by staff to, if they wish to process, we may be able to accommodate that, but it's always going to be subject to the time at which we have wastewater capacity. So just so you're aware, if you hear anything out there, there's development interest, but all we can do right now is serve the already approved projects. So
And how many are those?
I just have one other question about the previous issue. So if we do enter into a contract with the county, and let's just say 5 years from now, a big industrial company comes in and they're doing a lot of volume in business, and it is a tax, a substantial tax that's going then to the county maybe instead of to our city. At that point, is there a certain length of time that contract lasts, or do we have power to pull out of that contract and take the statute back to our city level?
the second question is, you always have that power.
Okay.
But the first question, or the basis of your question is that if there's a big industrial facility, you're going to get your share of the property taxes in any case. The joint powers just shifts the administrative burden of licensing and regulation, or registration and enforcement, to the county. So the property taxes will still be divided as they normally will.
I have a question. What LGI and the other developer that was interested out on the north end of town, are they still pursuing development?
LGI is building their project, is that Northridge?
That's Northridge 6, and that is 27 homes, and they are building right now. They're pulling building permits for homes.
What about the developer that came to the council on the bridge issue, or the road coming through?
The council just approved a 1-year extension of their preliminary plat because they are still interested, but there's some financial things that are standing in their way. So hopefully we'll be hearing from them in the next year.
But the wastewater treatment plant will
That is-
accommodate those developers?
Yeah, that's already been approved, and that is, yeah.
Yeah. The approved projects have capacity to construct.
Yeah, I
It's
would
just
assume, yeah.
anything else at this point is gonna have to wait for a while.
Our next meeting will be Wednesday, November 13th at the community center.
By the way-
I'm looking for a motion for adjourning the meeting.
timed up? Okay. Do I hear a second?
I'll motion to, what did you say? I'll second, yeah.
Second? Okay. The motion, the meeting is adjourned at 8:09.
By the
Thank you.
cement, some
That was,